Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. This week's Torah portion discusses a quarrel, a dispute that broke out between Abraham and his nephew Lot. They were fighting about land because they were traveling together, and Lot's shepherds were pasturing in lands that weren't theirs because Lot said, listen, God promised this land to Abraham, my uncle, and since my uncle has no children, I'm going to inherit him anyway, so therefore I could go into other people's property. And Abraham's shepherds objected to that, and a fight broke out. A riv, a dispute. So Abraham calls his nephew and says, Lot, listen, we're family, we're mishpacha, there shouldn't be any quarrels in our family. I don't want to have any disputes with you. And therefore, why don't you pick whichever land you want, I'll take whatever else you don't want, and we'll live in peace. And he resolves the conflict very magnanimously. But the commentary, the Shalah, 17th century rabbi, points out that the Torah says there was a riv. The word riv means a quarrel, a dispute. But when Abraham calls his nephew and says, I don't want there to be any fights in our family, he adds the letter hey. He says, Al natihi, there should not be mirivah. There shouldn't be a fight, but he says it in the feminine. Now in Hebrew, by adding the letter hey to the end of a word, you may transfer it from masculine to feminine. So bayit is a house, beita is her house. Why does he turn the quarrel, the word for riv, into feminine? And the Shalah HaKadosh, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, says the following. He said what Abraham says is, right now we're fighting about this. But once we get into a pattern of disputes, it will only continue to grow and to expand. Because like a feminine, like a woman, it will give birth. One fight, one dispute will cause a second dispute. And it will continue to multiply. Like a woman who gives birth to children, this fight will have children, offspring, descendants. And therefore we have to stop this quarrel right now, because the nature of a fight is that it doesn't stop with the first issue. If it's not contained, it expands. And furthermore, what Abraham was saying was, sometimes the dispute in a family starts in one generation, but then it's transferred to the next generation, and sometimes to the third generation. And generations of family members are not talking to each other because of something that happened generations ago. And that's why Abraham says we have to stop this, because it's a merivah in the feminine. It will beget children, and we can't allow that to happen. And Abraham in the Torah, by repeating the story, that one letter hey is teaching us two powerful lessons. Obviously, to always resolve conflicts, but especially because it could be passed on to successive generations. I remember hearing a story that there was a big Shabbaton in Crown Heights for college students. And there were these two girls, they were first cousins, but they didn't know because their parents, their fathers had a big dispute years and years ago, and therefore the children had nothing to do with each other over some financial matter. And these two college girls in their early 20s meet at a Shabbaton. They realize on the list the same last name, so they go over to each other to see if they're related. Turns out it's the first cousin. They had never met each other until this Shabbaton, because the families don't talk to each other. And then one of the girls says to the cousin, I'm engaged. I'm getting married later this year. And she said, I had no idea. Nobody in my family tells me anything. Nobody knows anything. We are not in contact. And then she says, tell me, how is our grandmother doing? Because of the fight, the grandmother had to be in one family and not allowed to speak to the other families. I've never met my grandmother. Tell me about my grandmother. And the cousin tells her all about the grandmother who lives next to her family. And then the girl who was engaged, who the grandmother was connected to her family, said, listen, I want you to come to my wedding. I want you to be my guest. And the cousin said, but I'm not invited to your family's affairs and celebrations. He said, I want you to come as my guest. We have to stop this dispute in the family. We got to break this pattern, this cycle. So sure enough, the night of the wedding, the cousin, who was alienated from her whole family, shows up at her first cousin's wedding. And she walks over to the elderly grandmother, who is in the wheelchair at this point, and introduces herself and says, hi, I'm Jenny, your granddaughter. so nice to meet you. And the elderly grandmother gives out a cry, a wailing cry as she breaks down, hugging her granddaughter, that she's been alienated from her whole life because of a family dispute. This is what Abraham says with one letter, Al na tehi miriva. A dispute has to be resolved and peace has to be made, or else it has the potential, like a woman, to give birth to generations. Have a wonderful day.